Hello and welcome. I'd like to welcome you to our meeting today that's dealing with humanitarian aid to North Korea and the complexities it brings. My name is Peggy Ujiri, and I'm the Executive Director of the Universal Peace Federation here in Colorado in the US. And I know we have participants today from all over the world, so whatever time it is where you are, welcome. Good morning or good evening. And this seminar is being sponsored by the International Association of Parliamentarians for Peace, which is an organization under the auspices of the Universal Peace Federation. So I'd like to turn it over to our moderator, Dr. Michael Jenkins, who is the chairman of the Universal Peace Federation North America and president of the Washington Times Foundation. He's also the director of the Northeast Asia Peace Initiative and the Middle East Peace Initiative, which have worked since the 1980s on conflict resolution projects in the Pacific Rim and in Israel and Palestine. Welcome, Dr. Jenkins.
Thank you, Peggy, and thank you for helping to organize this great program. Welcome to all of our audience. We have distinguished panelists today that will be sharing with you about humanitarian issues regarding North Korea. As you know, UPF has been doing a weekly webinar, and it covers different aspects of the situation of how we might address a peaceful reunification of North and South Korea. We address it from the point of view of members of Congress and from the point of view of the intelligence community, as well as religious leaders and professors, and also those who are in the media. We've had very interesting discussions, and I think today's panelists will bring us one of the most interesting programs that we're going to hear. We want to understand the humanitarian side of the situation of North Korea. We have Dr. James Jackson with us, and we have also Professor Hazel Smith. At this time, I'd like to introduce Dr. James Jackson, prize-winning author, international economic consultant, and humanitarian. His varied life experiences include lessons in entrepreneurship when he was very young, making millions in mountain real estate development. And he also is one of the founders of Project Cure, which is now the world's largest distributor of donated medical supplies and equipment to developing countries. Dr. Jackson's devoted over 30 years of his life traveling to over 150 countries, delivering health and hope to the world's most needy people. Literally thousands of people are alive today as a result of this tireless efforts by Dr. Jackson and all the Cure family. Over 20,000 volunteers work with Project Cure, and I believe his son has now taken the lead as CEO. Dr. Jackson's work with foreign governments has given him many international and national awards and honors, and including officially representing the United States of America at the 81st birthday of the celebration of the great leader Kim Il-sung in Pyongyang, North Korea. Very few Westerners and very few Americans have had that kind of experience. He's traveled to North Korea 8 times. I'd like you to welcome with me at this time, Dr. James Jackson.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Jenkins. And let me just say how much of a privilege this is for me and for Project Cure to be on this program today, because here in Colorado, we have a local contact, of course, with Peggy Ujiri, and I just must say you've done yourself a favor with connecting this lady to our community in Colorado. She's a wonderful person and represents your organization so very well. And I think that today I would just like to maybe relax a little bit and talk about a subject maybe we might hit it, known as relationships, because the more I think about this and the more I think about what you folks are doing in your efforts for peace, and then kind of reflecting back on our experiences with a lot of different national leaders and in 150 different countries in the world I've traveled in, and I have just gained lots of memories and want to share just a little bit. I wouldn't want to set this up. I give you a caveat. I don't want to say that this is something that is absolutely the best and most wonderful approach. It isn't. I come from a pragmatic and an empirical approach to this humanitarian world. And so that little caveat, I do hold some things that it humbles me to think that clear back in 1991, I happen to hold the license in my file for the very first shipping license from the United States into Cuba. And those were days when you didn't do that. But secondly, one of the prized possessions in my file cabinet is a very first shipping license from United States into Dprk. And I cherish that because I think of all of the historical ramifications. I think maybe just to share a little bit to give you an overview how we got involved.
Uh-oh. You froze up, Dr. Jackson.
I think it got disconnected.
We'll just take a moment. He'll be back.
Okay.
Welcome back. Welcome back, Dr. Jackson.
Well, thank you. I'm sorry about that. I don't know what happened there. But I just was saying, I was in Seoul, and somebody said, would you like to go to Pyongyang and go to the 38th parallel? Of course, I said, oh, yes. So we drove out to Pyongyang, and Anna Marie and I signed our lives away to the United Nations, and we jumped in a Jeep, and they took us down to the armament building. And of course, on one side of that building, the Dprk soldiers are staring in the windows, and on the other side, the UN people are. And I know some of you have been to Pyongyang, to Panmunjom, and it was such an experience. It was a life changer for me. After we'd been inside, and of course, there's inside the armistice building, there are long tables absolutely sitting on the 38th parallel, and in the middle of the table, sitting on the parallel, are microphone cords. And so you really get a feel. So there we were, we could go into North Korea, but they told us, do not make eye contact with those soldiers. Do not have any problems here, because this is not the place to have problems. But outside, after we'd been inside the armistice building, we were outside, and under a tree, of course, the Dprk had their microphones and the loudspeakers blaring in, and you could look across and see the false front buildings and whatnot. And somebody asked me, as we were out there with all that confusion and stuff, they said, Dr. Jackson, would you go to North Korea if you had the chance with your medical things? And I said, yes. I don't have any contacts at all, but yes, I would do that. And so one of the fellows in the group had a contact with a leader in the U.S. military camp there, and he had previously been friends, and somehow he got a hold of this leader, and he knew of another contact, and eventually he knew of the fellow in New York City at the UN, and I was connected with the ambassador to the UN. We talked about the possibilities, and everybody got excited about it. And so lo and behold, I ended up with a personal invitation from great leader Kim Il-sung to attend his 81st birthday at the Friendship Festival in April 15th of 93. So that personal invitation came in 92. And not knowing exactly what to do with an invitation like that, as far as visas and everything else, I got in touch with my friends at the State Department, And I said, I need a little bit of help with logistics and protocol of getting a visa into Dprk. And the woman said, what'd you say? I said, I need to go into the Dprk. She said, do you mean North Korea? And I said, well, yes. Well, you're not going. That's impossible. You don't have an invitation. I said, well, I do have a personal invitation from great leader Kim Il-sung, and I think I ought to go. No, you are not going. This is not a good thing. And that's why we are here to keep problems like that from arising. Well, that was June in 92. And about Thanksgiving, the State Department called me back and they said, well, Dr. Jackson, we vetted this out and you do have a personal invitation to go to Pyongyang, but we don't advise it. We think, and it was perilous times in 91, the Soviet Union was collapsing and China was not paying their debts and all of that. And there was turmoil. And so they said, we do not think this is a good time. We think that they're going to hold you hostage. And they said, so no, the answer is no, you're not going. And I said, well, now that you've vetted it out, I think I need to go. Well, you can't, there's only two places you get a passport to go into Dprk. One is in Moscow and the other is in Beijing. And other people have said they had invitations. They get to Beijing, they go all the way, they lose their money, they don't get their visa and they don't go in. I said, okay, I'm willing to do that. Well, long story short, we did go. I gave the concierge at the Swiss hotel my address. I needed to go, and I ended up at the embassy, and they were expecting me, and it was just an unusual thing. Flights only going to Pyongyang on Tuesdays and Saturdays on Air Koryo, and so they said you'll be here tomorrow. And we will find you at the airport, and you will go to Pyongyang. When we landed, it was quite an experience. Some fellows got up in front of the plane. They climbed the ladder up, and they were standing in front of the cockpit. And they said, "Mr. Jackson," and I go, "Oh no, it didn't take me very long to get in jail here in this place." But they took me in a personnel carrier. And I was treated as an absolute hero. And one of the things that I had in the process, I had met up with the ambassador. He said that I could meet him in downtown Manhattan at the Sheraton Hotel. And so we made an appointment at 10 o'clock. And sure enough, we found each other. And he asked me about Project Cure. And I told him a little of the work we were doing in scope around the world and the countries that we were already in and those kinds of things. And he looked at me and took another 20 minutes telling me that we have every bit as good a medical service in the Kim Man-yu Hospital as anything in the United States, and we don't need your help, and on and on. And I'm going, oh, oops. And so it was about noon, and we were sitting at a round table there in the coffee shop, and we decided to go ahead and go to the buffet line. So as we were standing in the buffet line, you never meet with a North Korean without being two. There's always been two. And so the other man, Mr. Dong, was standing right behind me in the line, and he was tugging on my sleeve as we're standing there, and he said, "Dr. Jackson, I need to say something. I know what the ambassador just told you, and I know what you heard, but he said, somehow I need to communicate to you. We in Dprk, as far as health, we need everything. We need to work together." Well, that was a changer, and that's what made me decide to go to Pyongyang. When I got to the festival, it was wonderful. Right away, it was kind of a hit. I'd known a guy who worked at Siemens Medical, and he was able to procure the slickest portable EKG machine that you can imagine. It's just like the one like President Bush wore and stuff. And it was remote control. It was really slick. And I personally gave it to great leader Kim Il-sung, and I said, this is given to you with my personal hopes that it will keep you healthy and you will live forever. It took everybody kind of by a surprise. But from that time, doors started opening. They put me in a meeting with the the top commissioner, and he said, he sat me down. His name was Hazel Royale, and for 20 minutes he lambasted me as an American. He even recalled the Francis Gary Powers incident and everything they do, and told all the shortcomings. And I knew, I just sat there and I knew, you are putting me on the defense, just like the ambassador did in New York City. And I thought, just be calm, it's okay. So when he got through with his tirade, I leaned over my teacup to him and I said, Hazel Royale, our countries have been in had quite an experience over the years, haven't we? I said, why don't we just stop all this? And why don't the two of us, why don't we see if we can do something good here? And Hazel Royale just leaned back and looked at me like it was shocking. But from those points, doors began to open for me. And it was a wonderful festival. It went on for, a week or so. And I was treated very well. But the last Friday night, the planes only go on Tuesdays and Saturdays, and I was flying out of there. I had been there for 2 weeks. But Friday, my handlers came to me and said, you are expected to be at a banquet, a very personal banquet, just honoring you tonight. And the ambassador at large will be there, and Hazel Royale and the Minister of Health will be there. And so after we were there, we walked in this big, huge auditorium, and only one table in the middle of it, the lights coming straight down, and lots of helpers and stuff. And we got in, and so the Minister of Ambassador said, Dr. Jackson, I'm asking you a question very simply. You said when you came here that you had to report back to your people. I said, yes, that's true. When they agreed to let me come, they said I had to be debriefed on the way home. And I said at that time, okay, if those are the rules, then I will tell my host that don't show me anything I shouldn't see. Don't tell me anything here, and we'll get along okay. He said, yes, I remember you saying that. And I want to know, what is it that you have seen and what is it you have heard that you're going to take back and tell your compadres? And I said, well, I have to tell you that this is the most beautiful experience. I live in the mountains of Colorado, at the base of Mount Evans, and a stream runs through it. I said, Dprk reminds me so much of the beauty of my own home and in Evergreen, Colorado. And he said, no, that's not what I asked. What are you going to tell them when you go back? And I said, then I figured, okay, I either stop fishing or cut bait or whatever. And so I said, okay, I will tell you what I have seen. Your streets, your roads in Pyongyang are every bit as beautiful and as wide as they are in Seoul. But I can go clear from the airport to my guest house here and never see another car on the highways. And I said, that tells me something. And further, you have 4 maroon Mercedes, and those are for the top people. And thank you for allowing me to ride in those all my time here. And then the second, I said, you have some older black Mercedes, a few, and then you have a whole fleet of Volvos that Sweden gave to you. And then you have some Ladas and some other things that are in here. But I said, I've noticed all the tires on any of those automobiles are very dangerous. That tells me you don't have any trading partners even to get tires. And I said, your troops, I see them, they're the only thing that go on these beautiful roads. And I said, but they are in old personnel carriers that probably are left over from Second World War, or at least from Korean War. And I've looked the other morning when we were at the intersection, your soldiers were in the middle of the intersection. They had the whole transmission torn out of one of those old things, and they were trying to put it back together in the middle of the intersection. If you want to know, that tells me something. You don't have trading partners even to get spare parts. And I said, I can tell you, when you take me up to a building for my meetings, I said, before I get out, the beautiful little ladies are running with coats on. They run around in the buildings and turn all the lights on. As we leave, I noticed as I turned my head back, I noticed that they're all running around, shutting all the lights off. I said, that tells me something. You don't have enough electricity to even keep the lights on all day. And I said, those, and the ambassador at large looked at me and he cleared his throat and he said, you are a very perceptive man, Dr. Jackson. He said, I have not seen some of that, but you are right. And he signaled to one of the waiters. And pretty soon they brought down some maps and he began to clear a place on the table. He laid all these maps out and he said, this is what we are going to do in Dprk. He said, no Western eyes have even seen this. This is an area called Rosensangbong. And he said, you know where Vladivostok is in Russia? I said, yes. He said, that port freezes over. Rosensangbong does not freeze over. We are going to make the next Hong Kong out of Rosensangbong. Would you come and help us? This is going to change. And we will not be without trading partners. And he began to explain to me. Well, those kinds of incidents absolutely changed the whole atmosphere. I was invited back, and we delivered. In fact, I invited the ambassador from New York City to come to my warehouses. We had pulled it and sat ready to be loaded into containers, almost $500,000 worth of things. And the ambassador and Mr. Dong, they were just flabbergasted. This is for us. No one has ever done this for us. Well, then we had to go through how we get the stuff delivered and whatnot, and through the customs and borders and all of that, and we worked it out. Another occasion, I happened to be in Pyongyang when they had the dam break in the 95 on the Yalu River, and I was providentially, they were cross-docking because you couldn't ship the things in from directly from U.S. into Nampo port. You had to cross-dock because they wouldn't allow you to enter into their port city unless you were flying a Dprk flag. So here I am cross-docking, unloading so we can load 2 full containers of medical things, and this flood hits, and they said, nobody's ever done this. You are the first one to ever bring things and not ask anything in return. How did you know we were going to have a flood? I just laughed and said, I didn't know. But those kinds of things, when great leader Kim Il-sung died, my son and I were there. They told us one morning when they came to get us, they said, wear your black suits and white shirts. And they took us down where about 100 people were waiting to get onto this trolley that they had just built. And we were right in the front with the top generals to take us out to Kamsusan, the memorial. And they actually let us go in, some of the first ones to ever go into the memorial palace and go up and it was breathtaking. You walked into this big room and a 30-foot tall ambassador, white, beautiful alabaster, a stone statue inside with the scrim of all the colors and everything. And then we had to go up a flight of stairs, and then we were able to walk around the 4 different posts, the 4 different sides of Great Leader lying in state there. But those kinds of experiences, I just want to, we go on like this, but I need to underscore the fact nothing is going to happen in that wonderful country except what's built on relationships. And that's why I commend you for what you're doing, Dr. Jenkins, in wanting to move ahead on some of this. Yes, they are a hurting country. Yes, they are so confused because here all the time they were giving all of this idea of duty. We are self-reliant. We pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. We need nothing. We have better everything. And when you get close to it, and especially in 1991, when the Soviets shut off all of the help, because a great leader knew in 1945 when he was just coming up as a leader, which by the way, he was born into a wonderful Christian home. His mother was a dear Christian. That's why the Ponsun Christian Church is in Pyongyang, and I request to go there every time I was there for a Sunday. And so, but when the Korean War was over, and the United States was given the task to clear out all the Japanese out of the southern part of the peninsula, the Soviets and the Chinese were given the task to clear out and send them all back to Japan, and so it was an economic decision. Why don't we use this young, charismatic, great leader Kim Il-sung to actually use his people as the army to block and safeguard our back door of Russia and China, and we won't have to put our armies down here. We can afford to give him, and it will be cheaper to subsidize him than it would be to put our own armies there. So in 91, when everything dried up, here they are at a crux. They've said they have Juche, they need nothing, and yet now they need everything. So we worked there for about 10 years. I had the privilege of rebuilding, refurbishing their rural hospitals, clinics. There are over 4,000 of them. We've helped in those ways. It's just been a wonderful thing. But my word of encouragement would simply be make good relationships.
Very good.
They will test you. I can tell you that. But if you are sincere and they catch the idea that you are really there to help them and not to coerce them into this or that, or you have going to play tricks on this or that, and it is possible. So I won't take any more of the time, but those are some of my reflections and my admonitions. Do what you're doing and go in with the heart of helping them be better off in this world, and our world will be better off for your efforts.
Dr. Jackson, we can't thank you enough. There's no question why you were honored with the highest humanitarian award that the United States gives through the State Department, the Florence Nightingale Award. Congratulations on your life work, and CURE is so respected around the world. And we have a few questions that we'll bring back to you after our next presenter. But I would like to ask the audience to thank Dr. Jackson for this work, because we have found the same thing. There are differences politically, there are very serious issues militarily, but also there is the engagement, and you can build friendships that can open many doors for people. Thank you, Dr. Jackson.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. My pleasure.
I'm honored to present to you at this time Professor Hazel Smith. She's professorial research associate in Korean studies at the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London, Professor Emerita in International Security at Cranfield University, and a member of Global Futures Council on Korea and of the World Economic Forum, and fellow Korean Economic Institute in Washington, D.C. Professor Smith has researched East Asian security and North Korea for over 30 years. She is regularly called on to advise government agencies worldwide and is a frequent broadcaster for global media. Professor Smith has lived and worked in North Korea for 2 years while working with the United Nations humanitarian organizations, earning a still valid North Korean driver's license. Professor Smith received her PhD in international relations from the London School of Economics and has held fellowships at Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, the East-West Center in Honolulu, Kyushu University, the United States Institute of Peace, and Stanford University. We are honored to present to you at this time Professor Hazel Smith. Welcome.
Thank you very much. And I apologize for the informality of the room. I'm in the middle of moving house, and so I'm in a hotel and I'm having to do it from away from home. Apologies for that. I don't know how I can follow that. That was extremely interesting, and I'm afraid I'm going to be much drier. So please, please put up with me. If I can just say something about my experience in North Korea. I've worked and I'm an academic, and I've worked and researched North Korea now for over 30 years. When I first started working on North Korea, I think most people, including my academic colleagues, when I was a young PhD student, would be hard to find North Korea on the map. And that was still during the Cold War period, when the small wars or the small conflicts that were most in people's mind were happening in Cuba, in Southern Africa, in Angola, Namibia. And Korea was not so well known. I visited by accident the first time in 1990. I was doing my PhD on, I'm a PhD in international relations, and I was doing my PhD on the relationship between small revolutionary states and the international system. Those of you that know Henry Kissinger's PhD on A World Restored, which is about the relationship between the French revolutionaries and the powers that oppose them, would know that this is a very long trajectory in international relations theorizing. Why do these small revolutionary states cause so much trouble for the big powers in the international system? So I was looking at the Sandinistas government in Nicaragua and the relationship to the United States and the Europeans and the different approaches. And somebody said to me way back in 88 or 89, do you want to go to North Korea? And I thought, well, why not? It was that time the North Koreans were encouraging academics from Europe and from the United States. There were United States academics that went to North Korea to come and go to have a look around and talk to them. It was a bit of openness to a certain extent going on in terms of testing out relationships. So I went in 1990 for the first time as an academic, and I realized I was completely ignorant. All the models that I had about this country were all wrong. You know, the communist models didn't really apply very much. The East Asian models didn't apply. The revolutionary models didn't apply very much. So since then, completely by accident, I've ended up working on North Korea. I visited several times, and I worked there between 1998 and 2001, not as an academic, but on secondment to the World Food Programme and UNICEF, although I was doing analysis for them. And I lived there, I had an apartment there. I worked all over the country, every province apart from one, Chagang, weeks at a time outside the country. So, and since 2001, I've kept writing, researching, publishing on North Korea because it's always interesting, and I think I've got something to say, and when I don't have something to say or something that's not new, I'll stop doing it. But so far, it's still remain interesting. Had several PhD students from all over the world, South Korea, the United States, that work with me on, and so you establish these networks, and people themselves are doing interesting things. So that's my background. So I am, although I worked in some very, very difficult conditions in North Korea, not when I was in Pyongyang, but when I was living out in the countryside. And I don't know if any of you have ever seen the Indiana Jones films. I mean, I felt like Indiana Jones. I'd be in the classroom one day teaching postmodernism and international relations theory, and the next week I'd be up some mountain in the northeast of Korea trying to, find the sanitary facilities which are behind a bush somewhere. But it's always interesting, and it taught me everything. Taught me masses, apart from the academic work in the records. I worked over that time, particularly with the United Nations humanitarian agencies. It was the biggest food aid program in the world when I was there in 1999, between 98 and 2001. And I was responsible for organizing the monitoring, reporting, evaluation system for 1.5 million tons of food aid. I also worked closely with many NGOs and still do. At that time, I worked with an American NGO called, a number of American NGOs, one in particular called Emeritus, which I had a lot of admiration for because they worked at home in the United States in poverty-stricken areas as well as abroad. And that, my view on working on North Korea, for those that work on humanitarian aid, is that we should be very, very careful not to essentialize North Korea and to engage in some really both rigorous research, and it's possible to do research on North Korea, although there's so much opinion that passes as research, but also to be a little bit humble about, you know, all the problems we have in our own countries as well. So now, I mean, my job is simple. It's not very grand. It's just to continue to research, to try to do good scientific research, to be objective. And if I find things that I think are important, particularly for the policy arena, to say them, even whether they're popular or unpopular. And what I've worked on particularly, although I started off as a straight international security person working on all the hard security topics, I've worked, obviously, since I worked in North Korea, a lot on food security, so-called soft security, which are hardly soft issues, actually. Starvation is not a soft issue over the last 20, 25 years. And again, one of the things I think I really tell my students, and when I'm talking to audiences, to people all over the world, South Korea, the United States, everywhere, is that try not to say North Korea. This is a country of 25 million diverse people. And there's a huge difference between the population as a whole, differences within them. But the North Korea of the population and the society is not the North Korea of the government or the state. And that's really, really important, especially in policy terms. I mean, I'm going to come on to look at the recent UN sanctions and what that means for food security at the moment in North Korea, but any resolutions or discussions that just talks about North Korea and lumps together the government with the actually very long suffering population does a disservice to the population and doesn't help us think about what the issues are. In a nutshell, before I go on to the detail of because I haven't got much time and I just want to pass over something solid, is that in this year, 2021, I think we are seeing the resurgence, and I'll say why, of starvation, which could be on a mass scale in North Korea this year. Nobody knows for sure, including those that have had limited access. The South Korean intelligence are the best source, because they these days, but nobody knows for sure, including the Chinese, who also have reasonable access, as to what's going on in the country areas. But it's combined with Kim Jong-un's recent pronouncements on repeating the terms the arduous march. That in North Korea is a phrase which is only used to describe long-term, to describe starvation and trying to recover from starvation. So I think we really, again, have to have a little bit of humility about what's going on, and also about our role as people who live in democratic countries, especially in the UK and the United States, where we have representatives on the Security Council. We're very fortunate to live in democratic countries, but I think we've also got responsibilities if we can see things that we might not want to have happening in our name. And I want to talk a little bit about those things in the few minutes that I have. Of course, I'm happy to answer any questions, and also to send any. I've got some quite long form articles and research-based publications on these things, which I'm happy to send to anybody, and which are in turn a reference so people can look up for themselves. They don't have to take my word for what's going on. So just to give over a little bit of hard data. One of the things that, again, I'm always keen on is to making sure that we don't have this narrative of North Korea being completely in a world of its own. It isn't. Although it's not the same as any country, no country is the same as any other country, there are some comparisons which we can use which shed light. If we look at the transitions between the socialism and capitalism in Eastern Europe, in Soviet Union, we can see some of the institutional changes that took place there taking place in North Korea. If we look historically at East Asian countries, we can see some of the cultural frameworks in other East Asian countries which are very familiar, say for a South Korean when they go to North Korea, which they can feel at home with. So there are frameworks that we can use to better understand North Korea. Even in terms of food security, there's often a discussion about North Koreans, about I call it the victims or the villains, the victims or the villains scenario. North Koreans are either all villains or they're all victims. And if they're all victims, then they're all starving. And actually, we've got lots and lots of really good data, and we have done for 25, 30 years now, on some aspects of the North Korean economy. So we can say quite logical, rigorous, substantive things about the North Korean food economy, and we can compare North Korea in these sectors, not in every economic sector, but in these sectors to other countries. For instance, it might come as a shock to an American audience to realize that there are more malnourished children in the United States than there are in North Korea. Whether you count that as chronically malnourished means that you live, but you're stunted, the horrible nutritionist word. You don't get enough proteins, vitamins, etc., so you don't grow. Or severely malnourished, which means that the nutritionist word is wasted, where you're liable to die without medical intervention. Well, of course, the United States is a much, much larger country than North Korea, but I still think it's salutary to remember that in numerical terms, there are more chronically malnourished children under 5 in the United States today than there are in North Korea, and more severely malnourished children under 5 in the United States than there are in North Korea. And you don't have to take my word for it. You can go to your Department of Agriculture, which is by far the best actually accumulator of stats on the United States and on North Korea and many other countries, and is often not used by political scientists. So of course, in percentage terms, there's a huge difference. North Korea is higher. In 2016, the last figures that were available for the United States, the United States children under 5, 3.5% of them were suffering from chronic malnutrition, and 0.4% of them were suffering from severe malnutrition. In my eyes, when I did this research, I was astonished that 1 child in the United States was suffering some severe malnutrition, never mind 380,000. That's a big amount. But of course, in North Korea, the percentages are different. Compared to 3.5% children in the United States suffering from chronic malnutrition, North Korea had 19% children suffering from chronic malnutrition in 2017. The USA's recent figures, 0.4% under 5 suffering from severe malnutrition. North Korea had 3%. So the percentages, of course, are different, but the numbers are still very, very salutary. And I would urge people, when they're thinking about North Korea, conceptualizing North Korea, thinking about North Korean humanitarian work, think about contextualizing this issue. It's really, really important, because North Koreans are the same as anybody else anywhere in the world. They just want the same things as we all do, which is a good job, a decent job for their children, a decent house to live in, some culture, some fun. They don't want to live in an authoritarian government. They want to have some freedom. Culturally different, yes, but the same aspirations. So let's not essentialize North Koreans. North Korea itself, whether it's the government or the country, I think is not much of a mystery. North Korean government policies are very, very explicable and straightforward. Their goals are regime security. It's an authoritarian government run by a small number of families, not just one. So it's regime security and territorial defense. They don't want to end up being invaded or end up with any of the Kim family ending up like Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein. These goals are very straightforward. They've got another goal, which is economic development, but it's important, but it's secondary to regime survival. Another thing which we don't need, actually we've got enough statistics to tell us this, is that the population of the country, 25 million, is a very poor population. And it's quite it's an interesting country for a scientist, because although it's one of the poorest countries of the world, whether you go by CIA statistics or whether you go by the Bank of Korea, that's South Korea statistics, which are the most authoritative, it's a highly educated country. Actually, you don't develop nuclear tests or missiles unless you've got a very developed scientific capacity. So you've got a very poor country, but you've got a very, very statistically 100% numeracy and literacy, and you've got a high proportion of young people that go into higher education. It's got a good public health system, even though there are very few resources in it, medicines, disinfectant extra, or chemical reagents. But the system for public health is good. So the vaccination levels, for instance, are higher, believe it or not, on recent figures than the United States for the basic vaccinations, polio, etc. And they're able to do this through all sorts of different reasons. So it's it's a complicated situation where it's a very, very poor country, but they can do certain things, which I can talk about more. I haven't got time to go into all of it, but we can talk about it. The other thing is that North Korea has changed from the Kim Il-sung days of the 70s, 80s and 90s, when everything was completely state controlled. For any person under 40 today, all that is history. I mean, or large parts of it are history. In the same way as when I started teaching the Cold War, this was part of my framework of living. For students today, if I'm teaching them, it's history. It's history. For a US student or a UK student today, it's, you know, what your grandparents did. It's the same as Henry VIII or Lincoln. It's history. And for young people in North Korea, the Kim Il-sung days with the way things work there is history. It's a different framework now. It doesn't mean to say it's not authoritarian. It's a very, very authoritarian country, in some ways much worse than under the Kim Il-sung, because there's no rewards in the system. It's all penalties. There's no economic rewards. But it is a very, very different system from before. So why have we got, and I've got to jump ahead here because I know we haven't got a lot of time. Why have we got a food security problem today? Well, most people will know that there was a famine in the 1990s, which killed, our best estimates show. And again, the US population statisticians who work in the various US agencies, government agencies, have got the best stats on this. The best figures these days, and there's a lot of research on this, show that over 4 or 5 years, probably about 500,000 people were killed, either directly or indirectly. That's an awful lot of people that were killed out of a population that was then about 22, 23 million people. What was the cause of famine in the 1990s? Well, the proximate cause, or lots of causes, of course, but the proximate cause was that the then Soviet Union, then Russia and China, at the end of the Cold War, stopped taking North Korea's exports because they were poor quality, and the barter arrangements were very favorable to North Korea, but they were not favorable to their major trading partners. And also they stopped exporting to North Korea at concessional prices, oil and oil products. And North Korea does not produce natural gas or its own oil. And those of you that were brought up, any of you listening in the farm counties or farm provinces of Nebraska or California or Wisconsin will know, and any of you that's ever had any experience of farming will know that anywhere in the world today, all agriculture is dependent on oil, whether it's for producing fertilizer or pesticides or chemicals to keep the pests away, agricultural chemicals, or for the crucial role that transport of food and crops and labor plays, or for production of plastic sheets. If you go to California or any of the desert areas, you'll see that you only have these nice fruit growing that takes place in California, which is exported all over the world because of plastic sheets, which require oil products to make them. So North Korea's food self-sufficiency project, which it had since the Korean War in 1953, only was viable given that they had oil imports at subsidized prices. When those stopped abruptly in the early 1990s, the yields from crop production went down dramatically and people starved. And actually they starved in the big farming areas first, because the North Korean government, as authoritarian as it was, kept expropriating food so the military could still be fed. The first visits that we had in the mid-1990s from humanitarian organizations, the big puzzle, well, why was it that farming families and children were starving? And our best guess was that these big areas in the south, these big farming areas, this is where the government was taking food to try to keep the big cities like Pyongyang alive, literally alive, and the military. So the proximate cause of the famine, there were other causes, of course, and the what? Sorry, was oil withdrawal in oil, and we could, after the famine period, what happened was that agricultural production grew again in North Korea, to the extent that by 2017, even with the earlier sanctions, what we saw that North Korea was more or less feeding people from its own crop production, with about 500,000 imports, which is a manageable import requirement. So from 2008, 2017, food security improved. I've got some North Korean nutritional statistics, which I'm happy to send anybody, which shows that North Korean children were on average by 2017 much better off nutrition-wise than if they lived in India or Pakistan or Indonesia or all of the poor countries of Asia. So, and this is all international surveys done over many years. So what happened in 2017? Why have we gone from food harvests in 2017 to be more or less being able to feed the people? Not that this is economically rational. It would be much better if they would import food and do other things, but they had a food self-sufficiency. They were able to do it. Nutritional statistics went up. We've got plenty of data on this. So what happened such that by 2018, we had a massive reduction in the harvest. And if I can give you some figures, I know these figures don't make, gross figures, I don't want to throw them at you, but North Korea for 25 million people more or less needs 5.5 million tons of food. Up until 2017, it had recovered from the famine enough to be producing about 5 million tons of food, give or take, and it imported 500,000. In 2018, it had produced less than 4 million tons. And what this meant was that in 2018, because food is produced in 2018 for 2019, in 2019, there was only enough food to feed 2/3 of the people at basic survival levels, and 8 million people couldn't get survival rations if they were distributed equally. And the reason for that was that the United Nations sanctions in 2017, December 2017, banned all natural gas exports to North Korea, which natural gas is a component of agriculture. It's the only sanctions on any country in the world that's ever banned natural gas, and severely cut the oil imports that North Korea was allowed to import, such that given that 30% of the requirement was for agriculture, that food production was bound to fall. It was just a logical, I mean, I've got the data, and that's what it did. So 2019, 2020, we don't have enough food by far, by 1.5 million tons out of 5.5 million to feed the population. And at the same time, in 2017, North Korea was banned from exporting almost all its exports, so it has no export earnings to buy food. The best estimate is that we didn't see an outright humanitarian crisis in 2019 because they still had stocks, and you still had an element of trade going on. Also in 2019 and 2020, it looks like, from my Chinese colleagues, so I can't get this definitive, but from the information I've got, is that China donated probably 1 million tons of food in 2020. Now, 1 million tons of food is a lot of food. It's as much, it can feed 8 million people for a year. In 2021, we don't know what's happening. The official trade statistics show that even that trade with China has diminished, and even though we wouldn't expect to have seen all food aid go through official food statistics, it does look like food and the oil that North Korea was getting from China has also diminished. I hear from my South Korean contacts, and again, nobody can get in because the border was basically shut about a year ago, that people that I've worked with for 20, 25 years who I trust, and well, certainly they're the people that would know anything about what's going on, that we are probably seeing at least pockets of starvation and maybe more in North Korea right now. The scale of cutback in food production to the same, at the same levels that we saw in the famine means that humanitarian aid cannot respond from NGOs. It cannot respond to the scale of need, because what is needed is to be able to get food production going again. And for that to happen, we would need to see fertilizers and pesticides and oil, particularly for transport, to be going in on a large scale. Now, the two questions here. One is that, how do you stop this going to the military? The thing is, oil supplies to the military were already banned before the 2017 sanctions, jet fuel, rocket fuel, etc. And actually, you cannot ban. You cannot completely divide military trucks from civilian trucks. But without trucks and oil going in, which is a major part of agriculture, you can't feed people. Basically, it's as basic as that. And the other thing, in responsibility. Well, of course, it's the North Korean government's responsibility, the welfare of its people. And of course, they're a bad government. They're breaching international law. But we should remember that in wartime, even when we were facing the Nazis, for instance, who were killing people in the Holocaust, it was still illegal to starve Germans as a weapon of war. The Geneva Conventions prohibit starvation of a population against an enemy in war. The problem is we don't have an analogous convention in peacetime, which shocked me when I found out. And I'm an international relations teacher, lecturer, professor. I didn't realize that until a few years ago. So this is a tough one, I think, especially for Americans, who are the pivotal power in the Security Council as far as North Korea is concerned, to separate off the people from the government and to be able to think about what the implications of the most recent sanctions have been for the North Korean population. I'm sorry for going on.
Not at all, not at all. We have about 10 more minutes for question and answer. Professor Smith, we sincerely thank you for the in-depth briefing that helps us really open our minds and hearts to the reality of starvation in North Korea. You answered many questions for me in your presentation. And Dr. Jackson, just really is very helpful that you're both here together. A few questions came in from our audience. Yes, North Korea is suffering its worst slump at this time, and the sanctions plus the self-imposed blockade to fight the pandemic has caused a great deal of suffering. What is the best approach to alleviating the deprivation for millions of ordinary Koreans? I'd like to ask Dr. Jackson first, and then Professor Smith. Just brief answers, please. We'd like to get to a few questions. What's the best way of alleviating this deprivation of the millions of ordinary Koreans?
I think it's going to take some more humanitarian interjection in here. There's no doubt, but there also is some long range things. One of the things that impressed me, Dr. Jenkins, was how many of the top leaders, when they found out that I was not a medical doctor, but I was an economist and a businessman, they would come to me and engage me in conversation. Please explain free market. Please explain capital, because our people are not motivated. They will finish, and I had seen that driving through the countryside. There was no motivation for doing more in creating crops. And I think there's a possibility here, an opportunity here, because that's what's happened in China. They are using more capitalist things and multiplying. So I can't help it as we get to go in to these places to be willing to share some of these concepts that will help them, and they can see how it can help them.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Jackson. Professor Smith, what would you say would be the best way for the nations, particularly the United States and other allies of the United States that are working for peace in North Korea, to approach the deprivation of the millions of ordinary Koreans at this time, North Koreans?
Sure. In the short term, there must be partial lifting of sanctions, the oil sanctions. All the others, I think, the other sanctions are very justified. But to sanction, to basically cause starvation, directly cause starvation, is not acceptable for me, who lives in a democratic country. And it doesn't affect the elites, because the elite get their money from sanctions busting, as in every sanctions episode in history, from Thucydides onwards, the elite never suffer. So for basic food production, oil is required. The rest of it, I think I agree that there would have to be a change in, as China has done, in terms of a strategic change towards a different sort of economic organization, because it manifestly doesn't work.
Very good. So, Dr. Jackson and Professor Smith, how did you follow, when you were working with the UN, Professor Smith, and the food distribution programs, and Dr. Jackson, the medical supplies, how did you follow the donations that you made to make sure they weren't misused by the wrong people, and that they got to the people they were intended to help? Professor Smith, and then Dr. Jackson.
Well, this is amusing, because we always, the food aid that comes in is very basic food aid. And none of the elites really want to eat secondhand rice. They want to eat steaks from Japan, or wasabi beef, and all the rest of it, whatever you call it. I know this word. So the food aid is always basic grains, and it goes to hungry people. And we know that because we've had very good access to engage in nutritional surveys, national nutritional surveys, from 97 through till 2017. By that I mean UNICEF, WFP, World Food Programme, and the government. So we've got plenty of evidence that, I mean, there's only one way that nutrition improves in children, that is if they get more food. So we know that the food that went in improved nutrition. What does happen though is that, for instance, if rice goes in, this is a high value commodity compared to millet. If rice goes into a nursing mother, they're likely to sell it on the market and change it for millet, because they can get more millet and get a bit of money from the same amount of rice that comes in. This happens everywhere in the world. Probably rice goes, if you have a lot of food aid goes in, it goes to these young lads living in camps, in the military camps. Doesn't bother me morally. None of them are fat. And they're not there voluntarily, even though they're called volunteers. So we know the food goes to hungry people, and we know the elites have got plenty of dollars stashed away under their mattresses so that they can buy whatever they want, and they do buy whatever they want.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Jackson, how do you follow your medical contributions and make sure that they're not misused or sold? Or
Well, from the very beginning, one of our cardinal doctrines was we never ship anything any place. Now you've got to remember, we're shipping into 130 different countries now. We never ship anything out of any of our warehouses around this country unless we have been there first, done a complete needs assessment on that hospital, on those clinics, and then we do a complete report, and then and only then do we have them request it. And so if I have pictures, I have photographs all through the years that we were working there. I would go actually to those hospitals. I would let them show me what they were using the Project Cure had sent, and they would obviously beg me for more, but they were thrilled to death that they had it, and they were willing to be very upfront and show us what they've been doing and comply. We had no problems with compliance and we were satisfied with the fact that they were using them as we had them shipped to use.
Thank you. Our program coordinator, Mrs. Peggy Ujiri, mentioned to me that Dr. Smith is very beautiful and she is a movie star, but the reason she's wearing prescription sunglasses today was she broke her other glasses. So just to let you know, and we're very honored. We have a couple more minutes and really interesting questions are coming. The pandemic, how bad is it in North Korea? Dr. Jackson, what do you believe? And just short answers, please. Professor Smith, what's happening with the pandemic? They closed their borders with China, which is limiting, more trade and food. So, Dr. Jackson,
I have no idea. I can only take what I get on hearsay as far as the pandemic. I can imagine how chaotic it is. And without any help coming in or vaccines, it'll be interesting to see what happens in the future as a result.
Dr. Smith?
Nobody knows, even the South Koreans who know best. We do know that the North Korean state, the worst aspects of the North Korean state are trying to use this opportunity to exert some of the surveillance capacity that they had diminished during the last few years, and markets had come to the country. We do know that they're trying to shut down markets. We don't know what the casualties are. We do know what food, as I said, we know what foods go, that there's not enough food in there, which means that if somebody gets COVID, and given they don't have access to disinfectant and soaps, and certainly no hot water, and hardly any electricity outside in the country, that it could be absolutely awful. The North Korean government have experience in quarantining, but the truth is that nobody knows what's going on, and that's very, very frightening.
This comes from former Representative Bob Coffin, who's also for years, city council member of Las Vegas, Nevada. Our two speakers have complemented each other perfectly. Too bad we don't have more time. Rockets for food, this would be a good question. Can we trade rockets for food? And the question really would be, could 2 or 3 million pounds of food from the UN and the USA be brought to Korea within 2 or 3 months? Governor David Beasley, whose World Food Program, the UN World Food Program, won the Nobel Peace Prize this last time. And he's also been working on North Korea and delivered millions of pounds of food. But could 2 or 3 million pounds could that be mustered by all the NGOs and the nations quickly? And according to Dr. Smith, that would feed 8 million people for a year. So that certainly would, 2 or 3 million pounds would cover a couple months for a large portion of North Korea. Any thoughts on that? Could the NGOs get that much food that quickly? Dr.
I'll
Smith?
take a stab at that.
Okay.
It all depends on the relationships that we can foster and muster. If you had the NGOs ready to go with it, and you did not have the cooperation, or they were thinking that you were trying to manipulate them or something, it still is relationship. It's still relationship.
Very good. Very good. Dr. Smith?
I think there's a political question and then there's a logistical question. Logistically, that scale, I think would probably have to go through the WFP, because WFP, World Food Programme, provides the logistics capacity for the United Nations as a whole. It's the only organization within the UN that can mobilize these huge grain ships and also planes if necessary. In North Korea, it would be grain ships, and they've got the experience in the ports to bring that amount of food in. Politically, I don't think, unlike in the Bill Clinton era, that the North Koreans are going to negotiate humanitarian food for anything to do with the nuclear program. First of all, because they're relying on China, and China did not have the surplus cereal at that time, and it does have today. And secondly, because I think that this is a government that is prepared to allow people to starve if it feels that it's that this is a way of maintaining the regime. And my view is that the regime is very, very fragile. I don't think it's going to go, but it's very, very fragile. It's very concerned about the young people who don't believe in any of the mythology anymore. And this may be that they can see the government potentially could see opportunities from the COVID crisis for the regime, but not for the people.
Thank you. Dr. Thomas Walsh is the international chairman of UPF, and he just gave his comment. Excellent program, very informative and insightful. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Walsh, for spending time with us. It's really an honor to have you. Hyacinth wrote, thank you, Dr. Smith, and also Dr. Jackson. Most interesting talk, showing you understand the problems of these people, but most importantly, you really care about the people. Your person-to-person care for the people is outstanding. Are you available, Dr. John Watts from Maryland, a pastor, are you available to do more Zoom meetings with us? We need to hear your research and teachings on Korea more. So that's a nice open question. We will certainly be inviting you both back. So let's look at Dr. Smith. I've read that Kim Jong-un has been exhorting the party leaders with greater and greater efforts to fulfill the 5-year plan and has acknowledged the failings of previous effort. What do you think is happening within the country to prompt this? Why is Kim Jong-un strongly urging that doubling down on the 5-year plan? Either one of you can answer. Dr. Smith?
I think one of the differences between North Korea and China is that in North Korea, really since the end of the Korean War, when they started to try to build up the country, they have never had much capital technology, and they've always relied on labor. In China, you had surplus labor, which when they had the reforms, it was able to flood into the cities. North Korea doesn't have, it has got labor shortages everywhere. So in agriculture, even when they really depend on agriculture, often some of it gets wasted because they don't have enough labor or technology. So I think what Kim Jong-un is doing, and I think we shouldn't think that he's all-seeing and omniscient, because I think that the policies that they're doing is just more of the same ones that have failed already, is that what they're saying is we haven't got inputs, we haven't got resources, we haven't got technology, we haven't got export earnings, we haven't even got very much support from our old allies, China and Russia. And so the only thing we've got is labor, those 25 million people and about, say, 12 million adults able to work, and they're exhausted already and they're hungry. And actually it shows even in terms of a different form of economic organization. I mean, China's a communist country. It shows actually their inadequacies as economic analysts, apart from the moral issues, that it's simply not possible to get more physical labor, however well organized it is, from 10 or 12 million people to run a complex modern economy, which it is, even if it's a poor economy, it's a modern industrial agricultural economy. So this is a very old mantra, and what they're saying is we just want more physical labor out of adults, more than they can give, in my view.
Our webinar that we had recently pointed out that there's no lack of the highest level of engineers. They are not depending on any other nation for their engineering and their amazing ability to create and build missiles, and all that is the highest technology. But they are hurting with the middle level labor force, skilled labor force. And that's also something to really consider. So how do we actually help the farming and the agricultural area of North Korea? I think that's a big question we want to come back to later. We really believe that this program today really motivates. We have diplomats here. We have people who are working in the State Department. We have built a very wonderful family. About 25 nations are here also around Europe on the line today. So we're very grateful for your presentations. We will be learning more and more, and we'd like you to each just give a final remark. So I start with Dr. Jackson. Final remarks.
I was sitting here thinking, yes, they have very brilliant scientists and engineers. They don't have brilliant economists. They have boxed themselves into a position of not looking outside of that box for any help. For example, I worked for years all up and down inside of Vietnam, everywhere, almost every square inch of Vietnam. The people in Dprk asked me to be their what they call a representative, and see if I could put together a barter and exchange, because here Dprk badly needed the food, but Dprk is rich in minerals and up in those mountains, the iron. It's just incredible, and it's what other countries need. If they had ever someone to show them the concept and power of, don't take your stuff and have to get money and everything, barter it, and you can control it yourself. And they are overlooking so many of their own natural resources in what they could be doing to utilize. It's just bad economics.
Thank you. Professor Smith?
I couldn't agree more with Dr. Jackson. It's bad economics. I would just say it's a very sort of humble request from a foreigner, from a UK person who's not an American. Please think about the issue of the December 17 oil sanctions, which are unprecedented. When we think of oil sanctions, we think about sanctions on Iran, Russia, Iraq. These were oil producing nations. Oil sanctions in most people's minds mean stopping governments, bad governments earning money. These are still called oil sanctions, but they're about actually starving. The direct consequence is stopping food growing. So I would plead, because America really, the United States I mean, I've worked closely with the State Department. We have very good colleagues over a long period of time in different parts of the State Department. I will be talking to them again this week as it happens. So I know that when the last lot of sanctions were just put on the list, it was just a tick. No, there's never been an impact survey in the State Department or in the UN about the consequences of those December 17 sanctions. So I'm not saying let's lift all the sanctions on North Korea, but I would ask all of you that are influential to have a look at the impact of the December 2017 oil sanctions on agriculture in North Korea. Just have a look at it and make up your own mind what you think.
Thank you so much. We certainly have learned a lot from today's presentations. I also want to mention that our founder, Dr. Hak Jahan Moon, has also written her own memoir, Mother of Peace. It's a beautiful, beautiful book on Amazon. But she, like Dr. Jackson and just like Dr. Smith, she really sees the humanitarian side very, very strongly. And she also has really asked for so much cooperation, engagement, person-to-person engagement, every possible way that we can build the friendships and work together to build a peaceful reunification of Korea. Once, just like East and West Germany came together, it was not simple, and still things are being worked out, but the Korean people really are meant to be together. They are one homogenous people. The culture is the same. There's a beautiful book by Anna Fifield called The Great Successor, but she goes into a great deal of interesting, and she's been in North Korea many times, but about the character of the people of North Korea. Right now they have 6 million cell phones, 6 million cell phones. Now they can't get internet outside of the country or anything like that, but they're all communicating now. And Dr. Jackson, you'll be pleased to hear that the markets are growing. They can't stop the market. It's called the black market, but they're turning a blind eye to it because it's now become a staple of the economy. And the ingenuity of the human spirit, if we can help them from that point of view, I think it's a great, great accomplishment. So when Dr. Moon and her husband met Kim Il-sung, they approached it more from the humanitarian side. And they had very, very long-term difficulties over the years because Mother Moon escaped from North Korea when the communists took over with her family. And also Father Moon is from North Korea also, and he was put in North Korean prison as a Christian. So they know about the bad sides of how things can go, and they do want nuclear weapons to be done away with. But at the same time, they emphasize so much heart to heart. You can never underestimate heart to heart. So you brought that to us today. We're really in your debt. We really appreciate all you've done. And thank you to our audience. And I'd like to bring back Peggy, if you would like to say some final words. And Larry, tell us about our next seminar. Let's welcome Ms. Peggy Ujiri and thank her for putting this beautiful program together. Thank you.
Peggy, you're muted.
Go ahead, Larry. Tell us about next week.
Thank you. And I really appreciate Dr. Smith and Dr. Jackson getting on with us. Thank you. You've shared some very valuable information, and we would like to work with you more. And I'll turn it over to Larry to talk about our upcoming web.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Peggy. Next week, the International Association of Academicians for Peace is going to talk. The topic is West meets East in Northeast Asia, a values proposition. Everybody here who's watching this already knows about the differences in the value systems of East and West, and we've all got our stories. Values determine the cultural norms, the response to events, the definitions of terms, everything. And it's the first time we've gotten into just a values discussion as it pertains to real issues. It's gonna be very interesting. 2 p.m. next Tuesday. Please be here. Thank you, panelists, Dr. Jenkins. Thank you, Peggy Ujiri, for your wonderful leadership in pulling this together. God bless you all.
Everybody, thank you for a wonderful day. Thank you. See you next
Bye.
week. Available. Thank you.
Good from Pakistan.
Thank you, Dr. Wagas from Pakistan. Thank you, Bishop Wagas.
Good night. Have a blessed day. Thank you. I'm very blessed. Your appreciation.
Good afternoon, Bishop Wagas.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
All
God
right.
bless you.
Have a good night.
Have a blessed night. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye.
God bless you.